The first time I heard about hustle culture, it felt right. It appealed to something deep within me that desperately wanted to change my life. It was 2015 and I was a textbook unhappy.
What's your opinion on hustle culture overall? I feel like Jordan Peterson has a good video about playing to your strengths. You should find out what you do well and do it really well and build your life around that, in my opinion. But don't do, but if you, like, I love hustling. I like hustling when I like hustling, but I also have a natural, like, hustle mindset. My dad did too. Like, we work, like, 80 hours a week, like, if we have to. But, like, that doesn't make me miserable. But if hustling or working a lot makes you miserable, don't do it. Don't force yourself into it either. Like, find your strengths and play to them better.
Guy, I'd gone from...
I feel like there's no way that an average person can be happy doing this hustle 24/7 shit. If they're not taking time to, like, have friends or do anything or, yeah.
druggy dropkick to corporate advertising guy who drinks a bottle of wine every night. I don't know which one's better, to be honest. But one day in that advertising job, I started working with this lady from New York City. She had just quit her previous agency to work with ours, and her previous agency was called VaynerMedia. I said, oh, what was that like working there? She goes, well, you know, the CEO, Gary Vee. And I'm like, no. She's like, you don't know Gary Vee? Really? She told me about this obnoxious but charismatic guy who simultaneously shat on corporate America while also profiting off it.
If you want to have one of the best lives in the world, which is you live on your terms, you have to pay your dues to get there.
I was hooked. I started listening to his podcast. I put it on in my morning commute and just get fired up. You know the feeling? And meanwhile, I was admiring Casey Neistat's ability to make a vlog every single day. There was this sense that with massive effort came massive rewards. And the cool thing about that is effort is democratized. Anybody can put in effort. It wasn't about talent, it was about hard work. If you worked the hardest, you'd win. Cool. Suddenly, rewards felt available to me. I got better at my job. I even flew over to New York a couple of times to work with this lady. I ended up being the creative director and writer on 9 Gatorade commercials and even one for the NFL. It really felt like my dreams were coming true. But there was one big problem. I realized that no matter how hard I worked in my corporate job, I would only ever be making somebody else's dream come true. I wasn't building my empire, I was building theirs, man. So I did what any ambitious, childless person would do, and I quit that job to start my own thing. The plan was to build an apparel company based on my illustrations. And once again, I was hooked. Doing this gave me a huge surge of energy and motivation, but as we're soon gonna learn, this was sadly temporary. I was still listening to Gary Vee, so in my head, my plan was just to grind 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I was gonna outwork the competition. And so for 3 years, from the start of 2016 to the start of 2019, I did exactly that. And then I stopped. But why? Why did I stop? Well, to answer that, I'm gonna have to take you through the 6 lessons that I've learned since I stopped hustling. Can't take myself seriously with that word. I'm on the couch now. Grind set, baby. New angle too. Lesson 1, hustle culture is deeply unsustainable. This is probably the most obvious insight and most of us know it, so I won't dwell on it. I was young and I had a lot of desperation to change my life.
This is also something that I would say for a strength or a non-strength for a person. Working for other people has huge cons and huge pros. It is true that if you're working for somebody else, you're probably not gonna get rich generally, and you're making somebody else's dream come true, but you've got a consistent feed of work, you've got a consistent schedule, and there's a lot of shit related to making money that you don't have to worry about because somebody else is getting the work for you. Sometimes people get really obsessed with this idea of being their own boss, but that entails, there's more upshot, but there's also way more downside too. There's a lot of work that goes into finding and securing your own work and being your own boss and building your own business that, like, a lot of people just don't want to do. It's a lot of extra shit. Now, there is a big payoff if you do it well, but, like, not everybody is built for that, especially by the time you're in your 20s, you know?
So I used it, but using desperation as your energy source 100% of the time turns out is super unhealthy. Don't get me wrong, it gets things done, but not forever. My main goal was just to be in a different place to where I was, but this would eventually catch up with me in the form of burnout. More on that later. Which leads me to the controversial lesson. Lesson 2, hustling worked for the goals that I had set. This feels kind of taboo to say, but yeah, working every single day had positive results, amongst of course the negative ones. But for those 3 years, I drew a comic every single day and I ended up going from 0 Instagram followers to about 200,000. So that was a result. But in saying that, I do feel like I need to clarify why it worked and why I don't think it'll work moving forward for at least me. It worked because I was young, I had energy and a lot of hunger. I didn't have overheads. Nobody suffered if I went broke. And as poorly scripted movie dialogue as this sounds, yeah, I had nothing to lose. Now I'm still relatively young, driven and hungry, but with one big difference. And that is I value myself and my sanity so much more. Back then I had a lot of self-hatred, and the work that I made came from a place of just disgust. Disgust with how complacently I'd been living my life, and I just really wanted to outwork those bad feelings. If I suffered, which I did a lot, it was because I deserved it. Now I value my mental clarity a lot higher than I value grinding. So what changed? Well, this did. Lesson 3. You can get more done if you take breaks. The idea of getting more done is still very much rooted in hustle culture, but the idea of getting more done while taking breaks was my gateway drug into a balanced life. At the start of 2019, I was asked to paint a private mural. I loved the idea. It was a coat of arms of a beagle and an ibis with the word Marrickville, which is one of Sydney's suburbs, underneath it, and it was just a bunch of Marrickville iconography.
Destiny, you keep saying find something you love doing, but that's a very difficult task for most people. I'd never said anything about find something you love doing. That's some fairy tale shit. I didn't say anything. I just said find what you're good at. Some people are good at working a 9 to 5 and compartmentalizing like that. Other people are good at managing a lot of tasks or whatever. Find what you're good at, and then like whatever you're best at is probably what you'll get paid the most for, hopefully, in terms of making money. I think for most people, the goal is to find a job that you can tolerate, that you're good at, that can fund your hobbies or your passions. I think that's like the goal for most people.
It was a fun job. I was also starting to toy with the idea of making YouTube videos because I'd seen this new wave of creators pop up. People like Matt Diavella, Kelly Stamps, Nathaniel Drew, Sav Brown, and Hines. I
don't know a single one of these YouTubers. Holy shit.
This side of YouTube on the day that I painted that mural, and it blew my mind. These creators felt like they were representing a new way to get things done. Suddenly, it felt possible to chase your dreams and have a balanced life. It wasn't one or the other. I took fierce notes. It was a vulnerable time in my life, actually, early 2019. It coincided with 3 close deaths. We lost my 2 remaining grandparents, and my sister's lifelong best friend, who was a big presence in our lives, died from a heroin overdose.
Jesus.
Life felt really, really fragile. But I started noticing this change, and that was I began to value mental clarity. To get more of it, I needed more space in my schedule to think. So I took my foot off the accelerator and spent a bit more time in my head, and I made a really big discovery. Lesson 4. Work is an addiction. Just like drugs when I was younger, I was using work to escape and run from myself. But why? What was so horrible about me that I had to run? Later that year, I'd open up to my partner Felicity and my mum about being sexually abused as a kid. It was a major childhood trauma, but my plan was to die with it. Just keep it a secret and end up in the grave. To make sure I never thought about it again, I guess my subconscious method was just to fill my life to the brim with stuff. If it wasn't drugs, it was travel, and when those things didn't get me high, it became
drugs, travel, say sex!
Work.
Oh,
it became
well, maybe he's a sex worker.
Hustle. Gary Vee's message, by no fault of his own, became my enabler. He's like that friend when you're trying to quit who comes around with a case of beer and a bong and is just like, yo, let's get shit-faced. But instead he's like, yo, let's get successful. But herein lies another lesson. Lesson 5. Competition is a construct. We're now entering the mental gymnastics part of the video, so buckle up. The triple amputee palliative care physician BJ Miller has this beautiful quote. At the end of life, you can let a lot of the rules that govern our daily lives fly out the window. Because you realize that we're walking around in systems in society, and much of what consumes most of our days is not some natural order. We're all navigating some superstructure that we humans created. And that's how I feel about work-related competition. It's just a story that we tell ourselves. The idea that we're all racing each other to be the very best is a very strong myth at the core of our culture. And also at the core of Pokemon. And it fools us into believing 2 big lies.
What?
The first is that there are finite resources, and the second is that you don't have enough of those resources unless you have them all. On the extreme end of the scale, believing these myths results in insane wealth hoarding while like 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. But do these myths and their implication mean that competition is a useless concept? Personally, I think competition is still relevant as a contextual motivator as long as we don't emotionally internalize it. When you're playing sport, tap into it. When you leave the field, don't. But obviously this is way easier said than done. Because even if competition is just in our heads, the consequences are definitely real. You gotta pay to live, and if there are only so many jobs, then yeah, competition's real. And on top of that, a lot of people still wanna make beautiful contributions to this world, and those projects take genuine hard work. So what do you do? Well, that's where the final lesson kicks in. Lesson 6, if you wanna do something that does take hard work, build a system that works for you. Work is only one part of life, and if you want that life to be rich and full, it can't be the only part of life. Seems sound, but in my experience, work can also be secret. My system before
Okay.
3.
Yeah, we agree. Okay, good job. All right, bye.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.